When it comes to building an attractive credit profile, there is one component that almost everyone misses. Without this, it makes it very hard to get approved for top personal credit cards and specifically the top 0% interest business credit cards. But when you dial it in, you become attractive and more trustworthy, therefore making it easier to get approved for cards and limits that you want in the future. I'm talking about high limits. When applying for personal credit cards, you of course want to apply for cards at the right banks, but also important, you want to be getting approved for personal credit cards that will be increasing your collective personal credit limits. So with that being said, let's dive in. When it comes to collective personal credit card limits, we're going to be defining this as the total amount added up of all your credit limits on your personal primary credit cards. So for example, if we had a $10,000 Chase primary credit card, a $5,000 American Express primary credit card, a $20,000 Wells Fargo credit card, but it was an authorized user, and a Capital One $20,000 primary, the collective limits would be $35,000 because we're adding up the limits from the primary credit cards and excluding the limit from the authorized user. The authorized user will be beneficial for other reasons, but when it comes to collective personal credit limits, we do not want to include the limit from the authorized user. So this example is $35,000 of collective personal credit limits. So why is this important? So banks want to lend to people who are already trusted. If you have higher comparable credit limits on personal credit cards, you will get higher limits on business credit cards. So if you think about it, if you have collective limits of only $5,000, why would a bank trust you to get a $50,000 business credit card? But what if you had $50,000 of collective limits on personal credit cards? Do you think the bank would be more inclined to lend you a $50,000 business credit card if they see that other banks are lending you higher amounts? The answer is of course, because they see that other banks are trusting you, so they're more inclined to trust you for additional approvals. So I like to see a minimum of $15,000 of collective personal credit limits. If you add up all your credit limits, $15,000 is the minimum I like to see before someone goes and applies for business credit cards. I think the most ideal range, more than I think, I have data from over the 3,000 people that I've coached on getting access to business funding and looking at many different credit profiles and seeing the results, and also the hundreds and hundreds of people through our Done For You funding program, which I'll link down below, by the way. The best range to be at is between $40,000 and $80,000. These are of personal credit limits, the collective from primary accounts, between $40,000 and $80,000. And so we can achieve this by credit line increases and applying for high limit personal credit cards. I have a different video on this channel about high limit personal credit cards. These are cards that are not only at tier 1 banks, but we have seen to give high limits. And so when you're applying for a credit card, do you want a credit card limit of $2,000 or do you want a credit card limit of $15,000? Well, of course you want the $15,000 because that's going to make your profile look more attractive because you have the higher limit. So when you go for business credit cards, if this bank sees you have this $15,000 limit, then on the business side, they're more inclined to give you larger limits. Okay, so we achieve this by credit line increases of cards that we currently have. And we also achieve this by applying for high limit personal credit cards. Okay, if you are trying to build up your collective personal credit limits, 2 cards that I would avoid would be the American Express Gold and the American Express Platinum card. The reason I would avoid these cards if you're trying to build up your credit limits on the collective basis is because these personal credit cards don't have credit limits. These are charge cards. So technically there's no limit. As you can see in the screenshot, there is no limit reporting to your credit profile. This is a screenshot from a credit profile. There's no limit on these cards. There is spending power, so it doesn't let you spend $1 million on the card. It allows you to spend based on your spending habits and activity and based on how much they can trust you. But regarding your credit report, these credit cards are not reporting a limit. So they do not help build your personal collective credit limits. So I would avoid these. If you're in the phase of building up your credit and increasing your collective credit limits, I would avoid these cards. I do think these cards are pretty good in general for sign-up bonuses and earning rewards, I just would save them for later on in your stack. If you're in the part of the journey right now where you're trying to build up your strong credit, you're trying to position yourself nicely to get access to business credit cards, I wouldn't get these now. I would build your credit with other credit cards that we talk about on this channel, and then I would get the business funding. And then if you want to get the sign-up bonuses from these cards and get the rewards and benefits from these cards, I would do it after you get your business credit cards, if that's your intention. When it comes to, is there such thing as too much personal credit? The answer is yes. When I started to do credit 5 years ago, I didn't realize you could have too much personal credit. So I'm going to break this down in two parts. One, you never want to have more than $40,000 of personal credit limits at a specific bank. So for example, at Chase, if you have 3 personal credit cards, you will not want to have these 3 cards to exceed a total of $40,000 of collective limits. If you exceed that amount, they are less inclined to give you high limits on the business credit cards. And I know this from firsthand example, and I've seen a couple people in my coaching program that have been limited on getting access to the high limit business credit cards because they have too much personal credit at that specific bank. So no more than $40,000 in collective limits at a specific bank. That's the first part. The second part, you ideally do not want to have more than $100,000 of personal credit limits at all the banks. If you add up all your personal credit card limits, you do not want to have over 100,000. The negative of this is Chase specifically is less inclined to give you a high limit personal credit card if you have more than 100,000 of collective limits of all your personal credit cards. You'll get denied for too much personal credit exposure. So that is broken down into 2 different parts. You want to keep an eye on that. Never exceed $40,000 of collective limits at one specific bank, and you don't want to exceed $100,000 of collective limits at all of the banks. If you're above these limits, well, you can actually call the number on the back of the card and reduce the limit on a per card basis just by manually requesting a limit decrease, okay? So maybe you're wondering, how do I determine new limits if I'm doing this on several cards, okay? Ideally, you want to have at least one card with a $20,000 limit. And then ideally you want to have several $10,000 limit cards. So say, for example, you're at $150,000 of collective limits of all your cards, okay? And you want to reduce some of your limits because you're at 150 and you want to get down to that 100K, maybe even 90K. So you ideally want to have one card that has a $20,000 limit, and then you ideally want to have several cards with $10,000 limits. I would focus on having higher limits on the tier 1 banks and smaller limits on the lower tier banks, okay? So the lower tier banks are going to be the credit unions, the store cards, the credit builder cards, secured cards, things like those. Tier 1 banks is like Chase, Bank of America, Capital One, Wells Fargo, okay? Those are the bigger banks. Those look better on your profile. You want to make sure you have higher limits on those cards. Citi as well. Those are the top 5. You want to keep higher limits on the cards you actively use. Okay, so if you have a Capital One Venture X that you use on a daily basis and you use it frequently, well, you might want to have at least a $10,000 limit on that card, maybe even a $20,000 limit because you use that card quite actively and you rack up some balances. And so the cards you use actively are generally the tier 1 banks. And those are the cards you should maintain a much higher limit. But maybe you have a card, maybe it's at Bank of America, but maybe you just never use the card and you're trying to reduce your limits and it's like a $30,000 limit card, but you just never use it. Well, that might be a good one to reduce from 30K down to 5K or maybe just 10K. But the cards you don't use are ones you can actually reduce down much lower. So that's the video on collective personal credit card limits. It's a very important concept. A lot of people miss it. And when they don't focus on building up their collective credit limits, and then they try to get business funding, they get denied because they don't have the comparable credit. So you want to be focusing on this over time and applying for high limit cards. And you want to be doing credit line increases over time to increase your collective limits. And if you're someone that has too much credit, like we talked about, you want to be manually reducing some of your credit limits. So if you are taking building credit serious and you want to get some help and support along the way, I have a mentorship program called Credit Stacking. For a small monthly membership, you can join Credit Stacking and get a ton of very in-depth trainings, some of the best resources on the entire market about how to get access to over $100,000 of 0% interest capital. that link to Credit Stack and to learn about it and to possibly join for a low monthly subscription, that link is down below. Epic program, and I hope to see you there. If not, keep watching videos on the channel, and I'll see you in the next.